Okay, so welcome to the Futurematch podcast, where we go and deep dive into the latest trends, challenges, and innovations in the world of recruitment. Today, as it is Pride Month, we want to discuss LGBTQ plus inclusion in the workplace, and I'm super excited to have Gemma joining us today to share her insights and experiences on this topic. Gemma?
Data, thank you so much for inviting me onto today's podcast. Always happy to collaborate with Futurematch. I'm Gemma Simpson. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the founder and CEO of Diverse Talent, and we are an inclusive hiring platform committed to reducing bias and barriers in the recruitment process. And diverse talent really came from my journey as a queer woman. I've worked in recruitment and HR and diversity and inclusion for about 13 years. So I've got to work on both sides of the table as a job seeker and as a hiring manager. And unfortunately, in both sides of the table, I did experience conscious and unconscious bias whenever I was trying to be my authentic self. So what I wanted to do was build a community marketplace of credible employers for job seekers that are coming from minority background or coming from the LGBTQI community to easily identify and apply to workplaces that are committed to diversity and inclusion.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I think there's actually some really interesting things you just said that I want to kind of pick up on as well before we go into icebreakers. I think, firstly, I love how you stated your pronouns first. I don't think that's something I see a lot of in meetings and interviews, etc. And I really love we've done that, and I actually think that's something that we probably should implement into everything we're doing. So now that you've done that, I also want to take the opportunity to do that for myself as well. So my pronouns are also she, her. But yeah, I think that's to me that really highlights what we're trying to achieve with this podcast, and we're trying to highlight in this podcast today, especially with just how we can, what's the word, like these very easy steps we can take just to allow people to feel more included and feel more what's the word, seen, I guess, in the workplace as well.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing you said is conscious and unconscious bias. I do want to do the icebreakers first, but I really want to delve into that as well and just learn a bit more about that.
Yeah.
But we'll start with something a bit lighter before we go
Okay.
into that. So for the icebreakers, I think the first one I'm going to start with is what's a fun fact about you that not many people know? It can be work related, it can be personal, just something people wouldn't guess about you.
Oh my goodness. That's a tricky one now because I live my life so publicly, and we'll get to that in an instant as to why I do maybe overshare sometimes. Um, but what would people not really know about me is I actually hate public speaking. Um,
Really?
but if you were on my LinkedIn, you'll quite often see me with a mic in my hand, whether I'm doing presentations or events or whatever it might be. And it wasn't until about 18 months ago that I started working with a coach to build my confidence in not just my speaking abilities, but also my presentation and getting comfortable in the uncomfortable arena, right? So yeah, people might not know that regardless of what post you see on LinkedIn of me standing on a stage, I hate it, but we have to push our boundaries, right? So that I suppose
Yeah.
maybe that's something. And the other quirky little thing, aside from recruitment and diversity and advocating for better inclusion, my other love is football. So I am a very proud Arsenal supporter, and I follow the Ireland women's football team right around the country whenever I can get to a game. And yeah, that's something that I really enjoy doing outside of the business world.
Well, speaking of football, I think now's probably the best time for us to have this podcast then, because the Euros are on at the minute, aren't they? How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, so maybe this is the quirky side of things. I've always loved football,
Mhm.
but I'm more interested in the women's game than the men's game, right?
That's
Um,
fair. Yeah.
and obviously being So I'm being Irish. There's always that conversation, oh, are you going to support England or you support anybody else apart from England?
Yeah,
But in the women's Euros, I was like, yes, go on England. I hope he's win because they're such a fabulous
yeah,
team. But in the Euros this year, I'm like anybody but. I mean, I'm sorry to our English viewers and Jada as well, but I'm just like, it's one of those cultural things, isn't it? So
yeah.
funny.
No, I understand. I'm not really much of a football fan at all, but I know that last year with the England women team won, and
Yeah.
I feel like the atmosphere surrounding that was so amazing. I just think that was, even though I'm not someone who really cares about football, it was still like, oh wow, this is actually really cool to see everyone get involved and everyone have such an interest in
Yeah,
women's football. So I know in the past
absolutely.
I just hadn't heard much about that.
Yeah. It's
Um,
kind of bringing representation into the mainstream, right?
exactly.
I
Yeah.
mean, they talk a lot about, oh, we're going to inspire a lot of young girls and young women to get into sports. Well, I've sat in the stadiums with crowds of young boys as well that are cheering
Yeah.
on, the female footballers, and it's a beautiful thing to see. It's a very different type of game, and I think that there's a lot more engagement with fans in the women's side than there is with the male side as well. So yeah, it's beautiful to see.
Yeah. And I think especially in terms of I think deals and just seeing them on a wider stage outside of football as well. Because I remember last year when I was in Birmingham, I don't remember the name of the player, but one of the women on the team was she was on a huge billboard in the middle of Birmingham near like the Bullring shopping centre. And
Yeah.
I just think it was so cool because usually you just see the male footballers, and I just think, even though again I don't like football, but it's something that I can really like sit there and be like, yeah, I can support this. I'm really happy to see this.
Amazing.
And then the other icebreaker question is, I think you kind of covered this loosely, but I'd love to hear more about it, is what motivated you to become an advocate for LGBTQ plus rights in the workplace
Yeah.
specifically?
On advocacy on behalf of others has kind of always been in my DNA, right? Because the country where I come from, and the wonderful family that I grew up in that always
Mhm.
promoted integration, both culturally, and ethically as well. So when I was on my journey of coming out as a queer woman, that was my first time maybe experiencing that conscious or unconscious bias in the workplace. Not necessarily from my direct employer, but as a recruiter. I would have people maybe talk to me, especially in the transgender community, to tell me, oh, I might look male, but I dress as female. Can I go to the interview like that? And I was having to better understand the environment that those individuals would be entering into. So it took me to go and investigate organizations a lot deeper than what the typical recruitment interaction is. You call a hiring manager, they give you a job description, and then off you go trying to find the skills that'll match what they're looking for. It really had to be people-centered recruitment. And so on that journey over the last 10 years, and I was better understanding myself and my needs and my values as a queer woman, and then advocating on the behalf of others, I realized there's difficulties in changing the kind of recruitment process and making sure that it allows for people to be their authentic self. So that's really been my drive over the course of my career. Is it something that we can change to make a placement happen? Is it something that
Mm,
fundamentally needs to change in an organization so that they're retaining their staff? And how do we do that through education? Because when we talk about advocating for the LGBTQ community, we're not just pushing a load of new policies and laws. We're actually having to change hearts and minds because there is an element of culture, religion, particularly with different faiths that maybe aren't as open to anything outside of heterosexual relationship. So, and those people may be in positions of power. So we do have to have that type of collaboration, education, and the business case as well. So you may not necessarily agree for whatever bizarre reason that two people can love each other. Um, but you might agree that it makes business sense to actually have a more inclusive workplace. So yes, I
Yeah.
suppose it's a long-winded answer, Jada, but there's so many different factors within that drive for me to ensure all workplaces are LGBTQ friendly.
Yeah. I think one thing I really am really interested to learn more about is you said about investigating companies. So when you people come to you and they discuss, that they want to go and do X, Y, and Z, and asking how they need to present themselves in these interviews, and then you said you'd go away and do some investigation on these companies' recruitment strategies.
Yeah.
What would that look like then, coming from your perspective in the past, and then kind of how that's changed as you've gone on?
The first thing to do would be look at their websites, or their social media to see whether or not they've ever put up a pride flag or some sort of picture of internal community groups or a pride breakfast. It's that again going back to that visual representation. Can I physically see anything that this company has done publicly to showcase their support to the LGBTQ community? And quite often I will talk about this, and it kind of falls in line with rainbow washing, that come June, marketing managers have a plethora of tools at their hand to for employer branding and to showcase their company, because they can use pride as a marketing tool. So the best time for me to look at it is, well, what were they talking about in December? What were they talking about in March? Where are they on the scale of the Stonewall top 100 employers? Are they even registered? Do they have any affiliations with local charities? Obviously, we know Stonewall to be one of the UK's biggest LGBTQ charities, but on a local level, there's a variety of independent consultants
Yeah.
and smaller charities. So are they doing anything with those? And if I'm still not finding anything, we will often ask HR or hiring managers, whomever we're dealing with, to give us a sample of their company handbook or an understanding of their ESG networks. And that does work quite well when you've got a more mature organization, right? So companies that are out of that startup mode where they can pay attention to their working environment. In some other cases, when we're working with smaller companies who don't have a budget, who have very limited resources, we'll then ask them, well, what are you going to do in the future and how can we help you in getting there? And so we might actually put the plan in place for them and have their buy-in, their commitment for that as well.
I think this speaks to, I think, your personal I think the word is empathy. I'm looking for your personal empathy and your caring towards people you're looking after and trying to find jobs for. Because I do think with the way recruitment is at the minute, um, a lot of people they're just trying to get people jobs and trying to get paid, which I think is fair because obviously we all do need to get paid at the end of the day. However, I think it definitely shows an actual care for the individuals you're looking after as well, which I don't think is something that I see as much these days, I think, which is definitely why I also wanted to join Futurematch, because it's about a care for people as
Yeah.
opposed to just putting whoever in the role and then making some money from it, not really caring about retention, etc.
Yeah, like
Um,
money at the moment is tight. We know that. And it is impacting budgets for diversity and inclusion resources throughout every organization.
mm,
Yesterday, for example, we got some sad news that Tech Talent Charter is closing its operations. Obviously, for over the last decade, they have been a non-profit organization to support companies to enhance diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And they cited their reasons is because they're no longer able to get the money into the organization that they need to continue to run. So money is a big factor when we talk about um changing those hearts and minds for organizations and ensuring that their workplace, yes, there is reasons ethically to make sure that you're supporting your LGBTQI employees, but there is that business case there as well. You want to make more money, you need to make more money, you need to have a wider, diverse talent pool in your business.
I think I really do like how you touched on how you recognize that yes, money is a problem, but it's still something that this is still an issue that needs to be solved. So then the question I want to pose to you based on that is, so what can companies of differing sizes do then to kind of promote more diversity within their within their hiring process? So from the huge companies like Amazon, Google's, um, Apple to smaller companies like Futurematch or even earlier stage startups.
Yeah. So of course it depends on the size of the company. I've spoken to heads of recruitment in large organizations like AWS, where they have a healthy budget to utilize for diverse recruitment or inclusive recruitment. And the kind of things that they will do is use hiring platforms like diverse talents that are skills based hiring that showcase their values, showcase those LGBTQ commitments. Um, they also will have employee led networks as well. If you think about the big four, maybe your PwCs and Deloitte's global operations, they will have internal ESG networks, maybe it's the Pride Network, and they are full of different employees across the world that also have access to stakeholders, to influence change, to bring new ideas and innovation to the business and how to be a more of an LGBTQI friendly environment. But the smaller companies, I mean, in terms of recruitment 101, certainly across the UK, we have the 2010 Equality Act. And that actually is a really good framework for any organization to follow if for free and be legally compliant as well. I mean, if all companies were actually following the requirements in the Equality Act, then we wouldn't have £1 billion workplace discrimination industry, right? So by putting in the right processes at early stage, and it's regardless if you are a 2 person company or a 2 million person company, if you have written out, here is our values, here is what is acceptable, here is what is not acceptable, and here is what is darn right illegal, and you have your company handbooks, you have your company's purpose, and then you also bring into the fold experts as well. And we talked a bit about those local charities. Within Northern Ireland, we have a phenomenal charity called Cara Friends, and they actually have the business charter where they will deliver LGBTQ training to organisations from all sizes in how to create inclusive environments. We're talking about pronouns, talking about expectations for when you bring somebody into the business that might be the only queer person in that organization, and how do you welcome them in and make them feel comfortable to be their authentic self. We also see things on written language as well. So when you are posting a job advert or you're using social media, be conscious of the language that you're using. I think we're all familiar enough now that gender language using he and him pronouns is maybe it should hopefully be a thing of a past, right? And we're trying to use inclusive pronouns instead. So using they, them, so that it is not pinpointing one specific gender. And we see that a lot in legal text as well. Putting your equality statement on your job adverts is always a big one too. I mean, it's not costing you anything to put that statement on your job advert. And then of course on your company website as well. So have a diversity and inclusion section on your, whether it's your career section or if you're using diverse talent, we do it all for you as well.
I think I really appreciate you breaking that down into really, really easy and actionable steps because I think what tends to happen a lot in these spaces is people just hear the phrase, inclusivity, diversity, or they need to increase it, and maybe it just seems like such a big, daunting task. But from the way you've explained it, it's honestly not that hard. I think for any company at any stage to make sure that they're being more inclusive, being more diverse, and it's really, really small changes, like you said, something as simple as just changing the way you phrase certain things.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's very interesting with the advent of AI and I guess um, machine learning. So I want to ask you then, how do you think? I know we've jumped completely towards some topics that are supposed to come up
Oh.
later, but I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on how technology and AI are kind of affecting diversity within the workplace and how you see it change, I guess, in the years coming.
Oh, well, that is a great question because we don't really know yet, do we?
Yeah.
So full transparency, we use AI in diverse talent, right? And how we built that was beginning our journey as a consultancy and getting to know thousands of job seekers and hundreds of employers, and then bringing that data in and cleansing it. So we own that data, we own those models. But how we've used AI in the recruitment process is always with a warning label. Take this with a pinch of salt, whatever advice you're being given. But it's not a decision maker, right? So it's more as a helping hand than anything. So for employers, we've built the bias checker, and that is when they can copy and paste written language like their job adverts, like their company handbook, copy and paste it into the bias checker, and it will pull out if they have any potential bias in that written language. And then in addition to that as well, we will help them map out their recruitment process so that it is inclusive online. But we're not telling them you should go and hire this individual using artificial intelligence, because it does still have to be a human decision because we're dealing with humans, right? The difficulty that I have with AI is probably more on the bigger organizations or those that are trying a quick fix for sourcing and selecting, because what you put into AI is what you're going to get out, right? So there's going to be that kind of mechanical background there. If you have a recruitment team that is five white straight males, then you're more than likely going to target more white straight males. Okay. So if that, and that is if you're using artificial intelligence to do your sourcing. So I think it always has to come with that warning label. We still don't know, the human race does not know where AI will be in the next 5 years. How it is supporting recruitment right now is by ethically written AI features like our bias checker, okay? But always having that caveat there that use with a little bit of unconscious bias as well.
I think that's another really interesting point you've made regarding, I guess, the human touch that AI is missing. So still having human decision makers while using AI as an
Yeah.
informative an informative aspect. And I think that's definitely like another thing that I found super interesting that Futurematch does is have this is within the recruitment marketing for, I guess, early years bringing back that human touch into marketing, and I really like into recruitment. Sorry, and I really like how you've kind of discussed how even though yes, AI is here, AI is here to stay, definitely, but we absolutely can't lose that human touch to things as well. I do want to ask, just for people watching, how can they access the bias checker? Is that a free tool? Is that something they need to discuss with you?
Yeah, it's completely free. So it's free for all employers. So it's a tool for employers to use to write their job ads or their company handbook. So you can get a freemium account on diversetalent.ai.
Perfect. I'll add a link in the description as well later on, so people can access that as well. I want to go down a bit of a different track now
Yeah.
and just learn a bit more about you. So, firstly, my first question is, how long have you been working in recruitment, and then how long have you been running diverse talent as well?
Sure. So I am 33. And I always have to say that at the start so that I can remember how long, because I started in recruitment whenever I was 20. So 13 years, right? And I started out as a technical recruiter I was employee number two at a small recruitment company in Northern Ireland. And listen, in my early 20s, I was only interested in three things: money, money, and money. Um, and that was it. So I was really one of those people that chased the check. And diversity in recruitment wasn't really even on my radar, okay? Um, until I was maybe 23, so it was about 3 years in. And I think for myself as well, I came out. So actually, we'll backtrack slightly. I came out queer whenever I was 18, but I hadn't started coming out in the workplace or the wider groups until I was around 23, 24. So it took me about 5 or 6 years to be comfortable with myself more than anything. Because once you're out, it's very difficult to go back into the closet again, okay? Um, so at around 23, whenever I was exploring attitudes maybe towards me, whenever I was coming out not as a straight female anymore. And then I was pondering, well, is this happening to other people? What other organizations is there? And just coincidentally, at that time in Northern Ireland, we were actually on the island of Ireland. We had a very politically driven discussion around the Equality Marriage Act. So, the rights of LGBTQI people were constantly talked about in the news. It was always in your face, which was phenomenal. And with that, in Belfast, we actually have a fantastic group called Working with Pride. And they, alongside a number of other leading businesses, like Danske Bank and Citibank, got together to campaign for equality marriage, for the Equal Marriage Act. And it was at that stage when I started seeing the bigger brands put their name to to equality in a country that has a history with equality and civil rights. I thought to myself, gosh, who else is there? How many more companies are are supporting my community? And so I progressed slightly onwards from that money hungry recruiter into more of a human centered recruiter. And I took a bit of a career break and I went off to Southeast Asia. And I spent about 3.5 years working in Thailand as a professional headhunter. And at that stage, I was the only white person in the office. Um, I think I was the only LGBTQI person in the office. And I was hiring for phenomenal companies like AWS and Indeed.com, Deloitte, and like so many like innovative, huge organizations that I would never have got access to had I stayed in Ireland. And so when I started to get to know those larger companies that are very Americanized and they've done the work, they've had the research available to them very early on to diversify their workforce. I started to get a better understanding of what best practice in recruitment actually is. So up to around 27, I came home to Ireland, and then that's whenever it went that is my full direction now. If I'm going to stay in recruitment and HR, I'm going to be inclusive and I'm going to be an advocate and I'm going to make sure that I only work with organizations where I would feel safe and where I would feel that I can be my authentic self in the business. So that was very well up until whenever I was 29, so just nearly 4 years ago. Um, COVID pandemic, it came. My role was made redundant. I was working at a different startup, and Jada, I was literally just sitting at my kitchen table, and I had some savings left, and I was like, right, it's a pandemic. So I got two options. I can either become a professional dog walker because I'm going out with my dog 5 times a day anyways, I may as well, take everybody else's dog with me. or I'm gonna try something out that I've been wanting to do, but maybe just didn't have the resources, or I was too KPI pressed in other agencies where I wanted to have that DEI model inbuilt into a recruitment agency. And so I launched Diverse Talent in September 2020. Um, Boris was still on the TV talking about furlough and talking about lockdowns, and I was making business development calls to previous clients saying, "Look, I'm about to try and do something completely different here. Would you would you help me on this?" And a lot of them were like, "Yeah, we're not hiring right now, but what do you need from me?" And so yeah, I mean, where we are now, we have progressed into a multi-platform organization. I think we have a very good brand in Northern Ireland. We're certainly very trusted. We've got over 5,000 users on our platform, and we've worked with over 100 employers. And we've placed nearly 200 people into jobs. And that's all because they know they can be their authentic self whenever they come to diverse talent.
I think that's one of the things that I really love that we've seen in the post-COVID era is just how many people were able just to have that time to sit with themselves and start
Yeah.
things that they really wanted to do. And I think that's honestly why, in my opinion, obviously I have not seen any data to back this up. I've just decided this is the truth. But I think this is why now we're seeing a lot of purpose-driven startups and a lot of companies
Yeah,
that are more focused on helping people as opposed to just making as much money as possible.
exactly.
Um,
Could you
and I think what
imagine? Could you imagine if, like,
Mhm.
whenever you turn 28, the government says, "Okay, you can have a year off, fully, all your expenses are
Yeah,
covered. Just go and work on yourself." The
I
innovate we
think
would have had Chat
that's right.
GPT like 20 years ago if that could have been the case. If, adults
Exactly.
were given a summer holiday and we're allowed just to stop and just think about what makes them happy, what is their purpose. So much could happen.
I think it's because the only time off you have is when you're so early on in your career, or even before you even started a career, and
Yeah,
then you don't really know yourself at that point. But I feel like once you're a bit older, you've had that life experience, you know kind of what you want out of life, and having that time just to actually consolidate, I guess, everything you've learned from the past 8 years of being an adult,
yeah.
it is something you should do. But
We'll
you
put
know,
that in a
it's
manifesto at some stage, Jada.
exactly. Um, okay, and I also so I wanna that question I asked was because the next question um is kind of a twofold question. So the first part of it is what does being queer actually mean to you? And then the second part of it is you mentioned in your previous answer about coming out both in your personal life and in your work life. And I kind of wanted to get an understanding of what does that mean to you and how does that look different personally and in the professional world? And then also do you think that that's actually a necessary thing to do? So I know that's a lot of questions to pose to you, but we'll take it a bit slowly first. So first question, yeah.
So, really interesting. What does queer mean to me? I've been asked that before, and I've struggled maybe to find the right words apart from, and I think my last response was to it is I love me. I love my life. I love where I am emotionally, spiritually, definitely working on my health. And being queer is part of that. It's part of my DNA. I didn't choose to be queer. I didn't wake up one morning and go, "Oh, do you know what it is? I want to fall in love with a woman." That was not on the agenda. Um, but I always knew. And it's interesting because when I eventually came out to family, to my mom, there was no surprise. It was just like, "Oh yeah, well now you're saying that, things kind of do make sense, you know." I think certainly in the 90s, girls like me were called tomboys because we're into sports and we didn't want to wear dresses. We wanted to wear like caterpillar boots and dungarees. And I was always like running around saying, "Oh, this is my girlfriend." Like who didn't know? I don't know, because I didn't know at the time. But I was definitely a late bloomer as well. Like I had no interest in romantics as a teenager. I was too busy with my studies, right? Um, so it wasn't probably until my late teens, early 20s that I started to understand me as a woman, as what makes me happy, and it was definitely the company of other females. And so I realized, okay, am I bi? Because I have dated men, but there was never that romantic connection there. I always found that when I was dating guys, I was kind of putting on a persona, being like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, right? But now I've been with my partner Siobhan for nearly 7 years. And I'm truly and utterly my authentic self with her. And I have been with previous female partners as well. And that's when I know that is the person that I am. So being queer to me is just being myself. And we talk about the coming out situation. You're never not coming out. Again, I'm 33 and I still come out maybe once every couple of weeks. The most latest one for me was to a beautician a couple of weeks ago. And she just automatically thought, oh, what we did the weekend is, oh, me and my partner, we were away. Oh, what's he like? What's he do? And I was like, oh, I'm just gonna stop you there because we're gonna get to know each other really well. I'm queer and my partner is a she, and she was like, oh, do you know I should actually get better at asking or not using boyfriend or whatever. And I was like, yeah, no, honestly, it's totally fine. I'm not offended. It's kind of like the automatic thing to presume. So you are constantly coming out, right? My journey of coming out was, there's not much actually to tell, and I'm very lucky about that. As I said before, I come from a wonderful family, and I don't just mean my parents and my siblings. I mean, aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole big Irish family that I come from. We're very welcoming, and always to my partner, we had Christmas cards addressed to the both of us. There has never once been, certainly to my knowledge, anybody with a disagreement or hurtful remarks. And again with my friendship group, like whenever I came out to my two best friends, I have best friends for over 20 years. And I was like, see this girl, I'm actually like going out with her. And they're like, what do you mean you're going out? They'd never met a queer person before either. So it was a bit of a new thing for them. So I know I'm incredibly lucky. And again, that's why I offer my pronouns freely. That's why I stand on the stage with a mic when I hate it. It's because people that are comfortable with with themselves, we actually have a duty to stand and represent those that are feeling uncomfortable, that are maybe living at home in an environment that is not welcoming to them, that they're stuck in a job where they can't come out to themselves, can't come out to their colleagues, and they're having to live a double life. And I want to ensure that whoever is in the audience, whoever's listening to this podcast, whatever it might be, that they know I'm supporting them, that I'm advocating on their behalf, and that is my mission to ensure that people like me from my community have a voice, and that's why we do what we do.
I love that. I love especially how you touched on. I think it's important that you've recognized that I guess your story isn't always, other people's story isn't as straightforward and as easy as
Yeah.
yours. And I really like how you've um, still chosen to acknowledge that while also positioning yourself as a representative, I guess, of people who just don't have that as well. And then I think leading off of that, coming out in the workplace, then how does that differ and what does that also mean to you?
Mm. So I first came out in the workplace then when I was about 23, I think it was. And it's so funny, Jada, because I came out to my boss and I was like, listen, I'm resigning because I'm going to China with my girlfriend. And it was the best chance to come out because I wasn't going to be there anymore. But I still had like a full month and a half's notice or something like that. And it was a surprise because I had talked in the office. I'd led that double life. I had talked about, oh, at the weekend I was out with my boyfriend. Haven't had a boyfriend since I was like 16. Or I was doing this or that. And so I created that lie. So first and foremost, I was a liar. But secondly, the reason why I hadn't come out in the office is because it was a very male dominated environment, a stereotypical male. I was talking about rugby and golf, and you know, I did not fit that narrative already. So for me to come out queer would make me even more different to my colleagues, who were all lovely people, by the way. It's just that there wasn't that inclusive environment for not just queer people but for females as well. um, so I got a really good way of coming out to the workplace, because I was like, I'm gay and I'm out of here. Adios. But there afterwards, I've had a couple of jobs. Whenever I was in Asia, I was very upfront because I wasn't going to live that double life, and I said to my boss, and obviously in Thailand as well, gender fluid is kind of part of the culture. And so I said to my boss in the office, like, by the way, I'm actually relocating here with a girlfriend. Can we put them on my visa or anything like that? And it was just like such a normal conversation that I loved it. And I was just like, okay, this is actually a really boring topic. We're talking about visas now. Um, Coming back to Northern Ireland, I will always have that little voice in the back of my mind to read the room first, because of our history, because we still have that political and religious backlash against people in my community. We have protesters, and I walk Pride every year in Belfast, and we do see the protesters standing at City Hall, or we see people on the microphones in the middle of the city centre condemning me to hell for loving somebody. My goodness, what I was told to do, or preached to do. Um, and so I do read the room beforehand, and I make sure that from what I can hear, those kind of um, uh, silent supporters in the background are there for me, and I'm able to be my authentic self.
Yeah, I definitely think it is, reading the room and I guess making sure it's a safe environment before, I guess, bringing that part of yourself. But then I guess that alludes to the wider issue of, you not feeling safe to come as your full self in certain spaces as well. But I think hopefully anyway through this discussion, more companies and employers can find a way for them to create safe spaces, I guess, within the working world, within the working environment that allows people to feel like they can present however they want to, however they feel most comfortable to,
Yeah,
without having to hide a part of themselves.
yeah.
And I feel like that kind of answers the question on why LGBTQI inclusion is important in the workplace as well. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm going to skip that question and then go to the next one, which is about how you've seen the workplace environment change for LGBTQI individuals, I guess, throughout your career, through your knowledge of the past, and where do you see that going?
So the workplace is changing. There's a generational shift, right? And something is happening in the workplace that's never been done before. And that is, we have nearly five different generations all working with one another. So you could have an 18-year-old and a 65-year-old all in the same team potentially. And the reason why that's so important, particularly for LGBTQ people, is because of the journey that our community has been on. So we think about back in certainly the 1980s, when the AIDS pandemic was at the forefront of the conversation, and that kind of brought in the equality conversation into the mainstream, because obviously we had in the late 60s and 70s we had the Stonewall protest, in that it was still illegal to be in a same-sex relationship. In fact, in some countries it still is. Even in Northern Ireland, in my own country, it wasn't until 1991 that we had our very first and very small gay pride march. I think there was maybe only 30 people that attended it. So we have that generational shift now of those that are 18 to 30, 35 maybe, have grown up in a inclusive society, that they've been more culturally aware of LGBTQ people, but in media, on TV shows, in movies. Obviously now with the rise of social media, and TikTok, there's so many LGBTQ influencers. The language has expanded, and people are now showcasing their authentic selves higher. So again, by the grace of the Equality Act, we have those protections in place so that people knew, or I hope a lot of people know, that they can't be discriminated against when they go into the workplace, dressed as the person that they are, or talking about their personal lives. They have those that protection around them. So the conversation is more fluid now, and it's louder. Um, in comparison to other workplace colleagues who are maybe in their late 50s, early 60s, that didn't have that generational cultural change, that they've came from an era in that it was still either illegal or a mental incapability, that you were essentially you were sectioned under the Mental Health Act if you were found to be queer. And so that they will have been in that environment where LGBTQI people were taught or talked about in a negative manner. So there is definitely the need for more of that education piece for all generations, the language piece, and of course now in the workplace we also have employee-led networks, and we have charities giving support to enhance the inclusion of whether it's recruitment or onboarding or workplace well-being. There is more visual representation across the media as well. So I think in terms of where we are in the workplace, more education needs to be done, more conversations need to be had, but it's also understanding that there is those generational changes, all in a little petri dish now than what there would have been 10, maybe 20 years ago.
I actually really want to jump on the generational shift you've talked about really quickly as well, because I think what I've noticed as well is with Gen Z coming into the workplace, I think this group is very big on authenticity, like you mentioned, being yourself, not feeling you have to change for anyone. And I think also, I'm going to use the word audacity because I think that is a very good one to describe what Gen Z, how Gen Z are, in the sense that it's very much like this is me and you can either accept it or not, but I'm not going to change myself. So how would you say you found, I guess, working with Gen Z and sort of bringing them into the working world versus, I guess, maybe someone of an older generation? And how do you see Gen Z sort of championing that shift and that change of direction within the working space?
Gen Z are a very important generation for diversity and inclusion, without a doubt. They will, in the next 10 to 15 years, they will be the decision makers. They will be the advocates of change, and they are the ones that are advocating for um better understanding, and they take no shit as well. This generation has been brought up with influencers, with TikToks, with movies and TV shows with queer representation within them. And so they know what equality looks like. They know what solidarity looks like. And they will take no shit in the office. There's a funny one that I've seen, is that a Gen Z person can't ring their doctor's appointment, but they can stand at the front of a protest. And I completely 100% get behind that. So yeah, I think Gen Z is definitely the generation to watch. We already know in the United States that the emerging workforce, 75% of the emerging workforce of Gen Z will identify as part of a minority. So whether that is on race, ethnicity, or orientation, and that within that 75%, 85% will be looking at a potential employer's company values before they make an application. So they want to know, can I be my authentic self here? Are you committed to representing me? Are you committed to my values? What more can you offer me? Is not just a salary, not just a job title. If I'm going to give you the hours of my life, you better be giving me something good back. And I have a total respect for that. But of course, this is generational or across the ages, right? So certainly in the case when the Stonewall riots happened in New York back in the late 60s, early 70s, that conversation came up, and it was people in their 20s as well that are now a little bit older in 2024. So we do see the youth of each generation driving some sort of change, but I do think it's Gen Z that are the ones to look out for.
So speaking of the generational shift and us having a discussion over this, I then want to talk about what that looks like in more traditional sectors. So, for example, in say law, in finance, are we still seeing that same kind of shift, do you think, in there?
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one because ultimately it was the tech industry that kind of began this cultural revolution, what we call it, is that such a strong word? Because of talent. They didn't have enough software engineers. They didn't have enough people to fill their jobs, to create innovation, to create more money. So tech companies had to think, okay, well, there could be a pocket full of indie developers or could be a pocket full of freelance engineers that aren't coming into the workplace because they can't be their authentic self, whether they're queer, female, persons of color, whatever it might be. Let's can change this. And so we did see the tech industry really drive that home. And now what we are starting to see is the more traditional organizations coming up behind them. Okay, so I talked about how in Northern Ireland we had the business backers for the Equality Marriage Act and who penned letters to government that openly put their logos on LGBTQI information to be sent across the country, like Citibank, like Danske Bank, and so on. And again, it's people led. So as law firms continue to grow and they're hiring more people into the organization from diverse talent pools, they're bringing in those that are advocates that are asking the legal firms, okay, I will come and join you, but X software company over there has a pride network. Why don't you have one here? They're like, okay, yes, yes, yes. We'll work on something because we really want your talent. So I think we are definitely seeing a lot of phenomenal like Pinsent Masons massive legal firm that are a continuous winner of LGBTQI workplace awards. They are leading the way. There's still more to be done.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's still definitely so much more to be done. My next
Yeah.
question is going to be about just misconceptions about LGBTQI inclusion in the workplace. And also, what do you think significant challenges are in sort of overcoming those and what we can do to help that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the misconceptions, gosh, is that we all look the same or that we all have the same beliefs in what being queer is, or we all act the same, we all have the same personalities. Um Again, we'll blame media for that. When you think of a queer man, you'll think of somebody that is a little bit camp or is always very happy and is a bit of a diva in essence. And yeah, maybe some of them are. When you think about a queer woman, you'll typically think of that sporty girl who runs around with a hammer and a drill. Again, there very well is that population, but it's that we're individuals as well. We have different personalities, different personas, different wants and different needs. And being queer, it's part of our DNA. But it's not our entire personality either. And I think that we can't just all be coupled into a room and said, okay, there's your Pride network that he's wanted, off you go. And then I suppose following on to that, in terms of what more needs to be done, is understanding that individuality piece. Is that yes, you can create an internal pride network, but there needs to be some sort of KPI behind that, right? There needs to be a network with a purpose. It needs to have access to decision makers, to strategic leaders. It needs to have the ability to raise awareness right across the company, and not just for one pool of people.
I wanted to jump back to something you said right at the beginning about
Mhm.
conscious and unconscious biases that you experienced through
Yes.
recruitment. So I wanted to talk a bit more about that. What did you mean by that? Yeah, let's delve into that.
Yeah. So unconscious bias is, we've all got it. And essentially, it's an opinion being formed in your mind that you're not aware that you're doing it. And how that comes out in recruitment, especially, is we look for people that we build a connection with. And typically, those people what might look like us or come from the same socioeconomic background or education background, religious background, because we're able to build rapport with that individual. Go, oh, well, I'm working here and I'm doing really well, and they have a very similar background to me, so they'll be a great fit for this role. So that's unconscious bias at play. The conscious bias is the dangerous piece, right? It's even more dangerous actually, because that's
Hmm.
somebody sitting consciously making an opinion based off somebody's characteristics, and I can never pronounce that word correctly, but whether it is on their race, gender, sexual orientation, and they have made a conscious decision, no, I don't want anybody like you in this workplace. And that is outright discrimination, but it
Yeah,
does happen. Okay.
yeah.
So we do have those unfortunate circumstances where we have companies rainbow washing, especially during Pride Month, where they're using Pride as a sales tool. Look at us changing our logo on LinkedIn to a Pride flag, or oh, we've had a little Pride breakfast for our 3 LGBTQ employees. We'll take a picture and put it everywhere on social media. But what's
Hmm.
the follow up to that, right? So, are you making a contribution to LGBTQI networks, to charities? Are you doing your compliance audit on the language in your job description, your employee handbook? Are you doing training with your managers or with the entire company? But are you training cultural and inclusivity training? So there is that. Conscious bias is when somebody makes that decision knowingly. Unconscious bias is the piece that we can fix, okay? Because it's the little bits in the back of our mind that we have to remind ourselves, no, I have to step away from my own personal views, my personal thoughts, and look at this individual skills based hiring. How we help with that at Diverse Talent is our anonymous candidate database. So we have candidates sign up to the platform, they put in their values, perhaps they're looking for a renewable energy company that's LGBTQI friendly, that offers remote working, and they will put that on their profile, and an employer will say, okay, well, this is what the individual wants to work in this sector, these are their values, and they're looking for evidence on how we can, or how we meet those values, but I don't know their name. I don't know any personal information about them. So it's up to the employer then to prove to that candidate, we have the evidence here. We are committed and this is what we're doing. And I think that's one of the easiest ways of reducing your unconscious bias piece, is by eliminating all of those little factors that make up our mind away from the conversation.
I think that's another example of how technology is really driving forward, I guess, diversity. But like you mentioned, I do think AI as a machine learning tool is one of those things where it really depends on who's inputting the information,
Yeah,
to ensure that we can counteract, counteract that unconscious bias.
yeah.
I also want to talk on Pride Month because I think you brought up a really interesting point about how a lot of companies, I think we see this across the board, but most relevant to what we're talking about today is Pride Month, is when they have something to celebrate diversity and inclusion, and it's just for that month, and they use it as more of a sales piece as opposed to actually facilitating conversations, actually using it
Mhm.
as an opportunity to learn. So, what I want to ask is, firstly, just to gain your thoughts on that, hear a bit more about that, but also, how can companies utilize Pride Month properly and in a way to actually create these safe spaces and make people feel included, feel seen, etc.
It's allowing their LGBTQI employees to lead it, right? But also for allies to be involved as well. So what you don't want is the marketing executive to come down into the office and say, "Okay, it's Pride Month, and so we're gonna do X, Y, and Z. We're gonna have these breakfasts, and we're gonna put up a flag, and I'm just gonna take loads of pictures." And I'm going to get ChatGPT to write a blog about why pride is important. Okay, that don't do that. Um, get involved, even if you have a small workforce of LGBTQ people. You can still bring in the allies, and you can still have that conversation because you're going to be able to showcase this to the public. And again, that's going to do three things. One, it's going to elevate your brand that you are an inclusive place. Two, it's going to attract a wider range of diverse talent for future roles. If I might not be looking for a job now, but if I start to see that what the commitments are to LGBTQ employees in your workplace, come 5 years, I'll remember that and I will go back to you. So that is pipeline and talent. And then third, you're potentially going to open up more business opportunities because there will be other business leaders that are ethical and inclusive, and they will want their supply chain to be to mirror their values
Yeah.
as well. So if they know that, oh, actually, there's a recruitment agency that is either founded by LGBTQI people or is heavily committed to the point that they are sponsoring events, that they are going to Pride, that they are going to governmental opportunities like events and things like that. We want to have them on our supply chain. So it's going to actually improve a vast amount of your business opportunity as well. So definitely in terms of Pride Month and how to do it in a more authentic manner, definitely be seen.
So I do marketing. I know I haven't mentioned that yet, but that's my role. And essentially, I think what I've noticed across the whole of marketing is people can tell when you're being authentic, and I think especially
Yes.
with Gen Z coming in as the next strongest group in the consumer market, they can tell when you're being authentic and when you're not. And I think
Yeah.
when they see companies doing this sort of was it rainbow washing was the phrase you used,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, when companies are doing that sort of thing, it's evident to
Mm,
these people. And I think to me, doing something that actually holds authenticity and gives space for that is so much more important than just
mm.
ticking a box.
Well, I mean, the tip for marketing persons really is that pride shouldn't be a surprise for a marketing campaign, right? If you're doing your marketing campaign and it is focused on inclusive workplaces, you're starting January and finishing in December. So every month you will have something. You'll have content mapped out for every month of the year. So you're not just going to be coming into June going, oh my God, it's Pride Month, quickly write something and put up a banner. And that's what's important, is that it's not just for one month, it's for life, really.
I completely agree. I think you often have that sort of, okay, we've done it, we've had our happy pride post, and that's it until next year. And I think what you've said about having that as a continuous thread throughout all of your content, all of your marketing is so, so important. I think that's something that all companies do need to work on. I think that's probably one of the first steps, I guess, to inclusion and to normalizing these kind of things as well.
That's right, 100%, Jada.
I want to say thank you so much, firstly, to you, Gemma, for joining me today and discussing everything we've touched. And I think you've been so, so insightful. You've had so many interesting things, ideas and takeaways I think people can really learn something from. And I also want to say thank you to everyone for watching as well. I hope that today has provided some more insights into LGBTQI inclusion within the workplace and within recruitment as a whole. And also, I think within your personal life, I think we have touched on some points that can actually help you within your life as well, both personally and professionally. I think, as Gemma has already said, I want to reiterate inclusion is a continuous journey and every single effort we make counts. So I think that's the biggest takeaway I want everyone to take from this podcast today. And before we sign off, my final question to you, Gemma,
Yeah.
is what's one piece of advice that you wished you received when you were first starting out in your career?
Oh, one piece of advice was just fuck it, go for it. Sorry for swearing. Um, there was too many times that I held myself back because I thought I wasn't good enough, and actually,
Mm,
I was better than most. So I wish I just maybe had somebody behind me saying, "Just do it, and you'll find out what's the worst that can happen." They say no, and then you go back again whenever you feel it. You're at that point. So yeah, 100%. Just do what makes you feel, do what you love, and take every opportunity that you can.
thank you so much. That was an excellent way to end the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe. Make sure to leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to follow us on social media as well for all the latest Future Map updates.